I had barely finished dragging my couch inside when 3 board members stormed across my yard, papers clutched in their hands, voices raised as if I'd committed some unholy offense. They told me to leave the house I had only just unlocked. The way they surrounded me, posturing with counterfeit authority, didn't feel like neighbors. It felt like predators circling prey. With every step they took closer, the trap tightened, as if this whole thing had been set long before I even arrived. I moved in a day early on purpose, and not out of excitement to start fresh, but to test them. I wanted to see how quickly they'd appear with clipboards and false authority. The Henderson cabin had sat empty for months, and the whole neighborhood whispered about who would be foolish enough to take it. Well, surprisingly it was me. The morning still carried a cool hint of August when I began unloading my truck. Curtains shifted in nearby windows, watchful eyes already on me. Mrs. Peterson's kitchen light had been burning since I pulled in, her silhouette pacing as though she was timing each box I carried. I couldn't tell if she was simply curious or waiting for the clash she knew was coming. Either way, she wouldn't have to wait long. By the time most of my furniture was inside, I had a decent sense of the place. The cabin looked weathered, its wooden siding faded, and the porch leaning slightly to the left. But it was Mania, or so everyone believed. The records listed me, Ben Carter, as the rightful owner, with mortgage paperwork neatly filed with the county. What they didn't reveal was the 15-year trail connecting this land to something much larger. I was maneuvering my couch through the doorway when I heard the footsteps, confident strides crunching across gravel, the kind that announced official business. I knew exactly what was coming. Sure enough, a sharp voice rang out behind me, polished like a speech rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Excuse me, you can't move in today. Your occupancy compliance period doesn't begin until tomorrow at 8 a.m. The woman standing in my yard wore a pressed blazer despite the heat and carried a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "I'm Diane Wells, president of the Homeowners Association. We need to talk about your situation immediately." I set down the couch and turned. Diane had come with reinforcements. A burly man with contractor's hands who crossed his arms like a nightclub bouncer, and a jittery woman clutching a clipboard who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. They seemed to expect me to panic, apologize, or bow instantly to their authority. Instead, I kept my tone even. "Interesting timing. How did you know I'd be here today?" I didn't tell anyone my schedule. For the briefest moment, Diane's smile faltered. She recovered quickly, but I caught it. Then the heavy-set man stepped forward, pulling a freshly printed paper from his jacket, ink still damp. "Curtis Grant, vice president of the HOA," he declared as if announcing royalty. "This is your 24-hour notice to vacate until your official move-in date. Community standards require proper notification procedures." I took the paper and studied it. The letterhead looked official, stamped with a logo that screamed wannabe authority. But the content was nonsense. A 24-hour deadline. For what? It had no legal foundation, just a clumsy attempt at intimidation. "I've got to hand it to you," I said, folding the document carefully, fresh ink and all. "You must have been up early preparing for me." Curtis shifted uneasily, not sure if I was mocking him or impressed. Truth was, it was both. Their desperation to control me was almost artistic in its transparency. Sensing things weren't going her way, Diane stepped closer, her perfume and coffee breath mingling with irritation. "Smart choice, Mr. Carter. We run a tight community. Respect our authority, and you'll fit right in." "Cause problems." A broken bar. She let the threat linger. The clipboard woman finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "The violation notice includes contact information for approved moving companies who work with our schedule." She handed me another sheet listing 3 overpriced businesses, each charging nearly 50% above normal rates. At the bottom, of course, sat Curtis Grant's name as the HOA's preferred contractor liaison. I looked from one face to another. Years of bullying neighbors had given them confidence. They expected me to surrender and thank them for it. Instead, I just studied them like specimens under glass. My hands trembled slightly, though I kept my composure. Was I being too clever for my own good? "Well," I finally said, "I suppose I should respect the authority of people who clearly know what they're doing." Diane's grin widened, already savoring her victory. Curtis relaxed, Satisfied they had domesticated another homeowner before real trouble began, they left with smug swagger, Diane pulling out her phone to brag to the rest of the board. I watched them retreat, memorizing the way they moved like predators marking territory. They'd given me 24 hours. 24 hours to prove I was a pushover or to show them I wasn't. I finished moving my couch and unpacked the rest of the morning, thinking about that phony notice. This wasn't just about control. They were testing limits, seeing how far they could push before someone resisted. The next morning, a certified letter lay waiting at my door, like a dead animal dropped as a warning. I found it propped against the frame, stamped with county seals for extra intimidation. Inside, in bold red letters, was an encroachment violation notice. According to this official-looking piece of fiction, my cabin now sat on community easement land. Yesterday, their issue had been my moving schedule. Today, suddenly, I was illegally occupying association property. 30 days to relocate or correct the boundary, it said. I almost had to admire their creativity. I was still processing this absurd escalation when a knock sounded at my door, soft, hesitant, nothing like the board's pounding visits. A woman about my age stood outside, pipe wrench in hand, wearing an apologetic smile. She introduced herself as Molly Bishop, from 3 houses down. Bathroom emergency, leaking valve via terrible timing, she explained, as I rummaged through boxes for tools. While I searched, she moved casually through my kitchen, too comfortable for a neighbor supposedly meeting me for the first time. When I turned with the wrench, she was already standing by my toolbox, straightening up like she'd been peeking at my morning mail. She thanked me sincerely, then paused at the door. Almost as an afterthought, she mentioned she'd come across something at the county clerk's office the day before, a survey map showing some very interesting details about local property boundaries. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with my coffee, that certified letter, and a gnawing suspicion that my morning had only just begun. It didn't take long to realize Molly's visit wasn't about plumbing at all. When I moved my toolbox, I found a folded paper tucked underneath the metal edge, a county survey map dated 2018. It showed every lot in the neighborhood with the kind of precision only professional surveyors could produce. According to that document, my cabin was exactly where it was supposed to be, with 3 feet of clearance on all sides from any easement or shared land. But attached to it with a paper clip was the HOA's current map, and that was where things got interesting. Somehow, between 2018 and now, the property lines had shifted 3 feet toward my land. On the new version, the community easement path curved directly under my front porch, the exact violation Diane's letter claimed existed. Someone had redrawn the boundaries, quietly and without bothering to notify the county or anyone who might challenge them. It wasn't sloppy work, either. Whoever did it had shifted the lines just enough to create a problem for me while leaving the rest of the community untouched. I spent the next hour comparing the 2 maps, remembering when my father taught me to hammer stakes into the earth when I was 12. His rough hands guided mine as he explained how property lines told the truth when people didn't. Those old lessons came rushing back as I realized the precision here wasn't accidental. This was deliberate manipulation, done with skill. By noon I was in my front yard with a metal detector, hunting for the original boundary pins. The first 2 were right where the 2018 survey had marked them, rusted stakes buried deep in hard-packed soil. But the eastern pin of the one that marked the line closest to my cabana was gone. My detector eventually found it 3 feet closer to the house, repositioned with a kind of accuracy that only came from professional tools and knowledge of property law. I called the county surveyor to report it. He didn't sugarcoat his response. Moving boundary markers without authorization wasn't some technical violation, it was felony fraud. That doesn't happen by accident, he said firmly. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. His tone carried the weight of experience, the kind that came from seeing simple disputes escalate into criminal cases. I stood in my yard, holding the displaced pin, thinking about Diane's 30-day ultimatum. This wasn't just a game of HOA intimidation anymore. It was a crime. They weren't bending rules as they were breaking laws, betting I'd be too afraid or too ignorant to fight back. That evening, Molly returned my wrench, lingering at my porch as if weighing whether to say more. Finally, she leaned in and revealed that my situation wasn't unique. The Henderson cabin wasn't the first property to face boundary disputes. In fact, 4 other homeowners had received nearly identical violation notices over the years. The same phrasing, same deadlines. Each one had sold their homes at a loss rather than fight. The Williams family was told their deck encroached on easement land, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. They sold for $40,000 under asking. The Rodriguez family, same story, but with a garden shed. And always, she added, the homeowners who got targeted were the ones who questioned the board's finances or dared to push back on HOA decisions. After she left, I couldn't shake the thought, Diane and her board weren't just playing power games. They were orchestrating property theft, turning fraudulent maps into leverage, forcing people out to benefit themselves. For a moment, I thought my refusal to fold had gotten through to them. 3 days passed quietly. But on Wednesday morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and a dozen texts from neighbors I hadn't even met, all asking if I was okay. That's when I discovered the next phase of their attack. At 6 o'clock sharp, the HOA blasted a community-wide email titled Emergency Community Safety Notice. 3 paragraphs of carefully crafted language painted me as a dangerous outsider with no respect for rules or safety. It was vague enough to avoid direct slander, but clear enough to mark me as a problem no one should associate with. Within hours, screenshots flooded the neighborhood social app, complete with edited photos of my cabin. Bright red arrows highlighted violations, captions screamed warnings about falling property values, and anonymous accounts repeated the message like gospel. I traced the posts back to their source. Every one of them, every concerned neighbor, every helpful suggestion came from the same IP address, the HOA's office. Diane and her crew weren't just intimidating me in person anymore. They were running a coordinated smear campaign, pretending to be multiple residents raising concerns. This wasn't neighborhood management, it was digital warfare. Organized harassment, systematic, intentional, and it was illegal. I documented everything: timestamps, identical phrasing, the coordinated posting schedules. If they wanted to weaponize the internet, I'd fight back with evidence. But while I built my case, the fallout hit hard. By Thursday, my internet technician canceled installation, apologizing that he'd been warned about issues at my address. Food delivery drivers refused my orders, citing community safety concerns. Even my handyman backed out of a repair job, muttering about reputation and drama. By Friday evening, I was eating cold sandwiches by flashlight, sweating in the cabin without air conditioning. Every service I needed was being cut off, every provider suddenly too informed to help me. Curtis had even called the HVAC company directly, claiming I was an unprofessional customer who might not pay. By Saturday, they escalated again. An email arrived in my private inbox, the one I used only for banking and personal business. The subject line read, "Final warning about escalated enforcement actions." The message was a masterclass in veiled threats. It never mentioned violence outright, but the meaning was clear. If I didn't comply, life in this community would become impossible. I forwarded the email to my lawyer along with all the evidence I'd gathered. His reply came quickly. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was coordinated interference with business, economic sabotage, cyber harassment, all grounds for criminal charges. But instead of striking back immediately, I chose patience. Let them keep building their case against themselves. Still, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't getting to me. Sitting in a dark, stifling cabin with no internet, no reliable food delivery, and no service, it was hard not to wonder if I was outsmarting them, or just outlasting myself. The delivery trucks had stopped coming, unwilling to risk HOA retaliation, and I found myself relying on silence as my defense. But I hadn't expected that choice to backfire so brutally. It turned out I wasn't as prepared for psychological warfare as I thought. Diane showed up again at my door, this time without her usual entourage. She stood there with a mask of forced sympathy, surveying the evidence of her campaign success like a commander admiring conquered ground. The abandoned packages stuck at the parking lot, my weariness from hauling supplies by hand, the darkened windows signaling my forced disconnection from the outside world, all of it spoke to her victory. "We really do hope you find a place more fitting for someone with your broken bar unique way of living," she said, that practiced smile on her face never quite reaching her eyes. Some people just aren't meant for the kind of cooperative environment we've built here. Nothing wrong with admitting you made a mistake. Her confidence was undeniably the confidence of someone who'd orchestrated a pressure campaign and watched it unfold exactly as intended. She was practically glowing with the satisfaction of breaking down another target who dared resist her carefully crafted order. I started to wonder how long silence could shield me before it destroyed me completely. The next morning, I discovered a heavy chain stretched across the community walking path, padlocked at both ends, with a bold laminated notice declaring the trail closed due to safety violations. That pathway had been my lifeline, the only practical route for deliveries or visitors to reach my cabin without clogging narrow streets or trespassing. Now it was gone, officially blocked under the guise of authority. The consequences were immediate. Deliveries, already scarce, became impossible. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as if I'd been marked with some kind of criminal stigma. 7 Airbnb reservations vanished in hours, all citing warnings directly from the association about safety concerns and illegal rentals. My listing was suspended pending investigation. Just like that, my rental income, the very thing I relied on for mortgage payments, was gone. Service providers pulled out one after another. The internet installer canceled for good, citing complaints from community members. Food deliveries stopped. I was reduced to dragging groceries half a mile in scorching heat while neighbors watched like it was a performance meant for their amusement. By midweek, the isolation had begun to wear me down. I sat in the dark, eating cold meals by flashlight, without air conditioning or reliable power. The walls of my cabin felt more like a prison cell, and for the first time, I admitted to myself that maybe I was the one trapped in a game I couldn't win. But I told myself this was strategy, that silence and patience were necessary until the time was right to reveal the truth. Still, lying in the heat, my phone battery dwindling, I wondered if I had overestimated my ability to endure. The HOA controlled every resource I needed, and with each day, my resolve felt more like stubbornness than strength. Diane returned again, alone, surveying the wreckage of her work. She walked slowly around my property, eyes gleaming as she examined the stranded packages, the rigged-up wiring, the absence of normal household functions. "We truly hope you find a place that fits your approach better," she said sweetly, her words dripping with false kindness. "It's not judgment, just reality. Not everyone is suited for the standards we hold here." Her gaze fell to a box I had dragged from the main road. She nudged it with her toe like it was evidence in an investigation, a small but deliberate gesture of triumph. I could see the glee in her eyes, already rehearsing the calls she'd make to spread news of my collapse. Standing there, I realized this wasn't just intimidation. It was a performance designed for the entire neighborhood. That night, I gathered everything, photos of the chained-off path, screenshots of the harassment, proof of service cancellations, and sent it to my lawyer. His response was blunt. This wasn't just an HOA feud anymore. This was targeted harassment, interference with property rights, and a violation of civil protections. "You could press criminal charges today," he told me. "They've crossed the line. The only question is whether you want immediate action or long-term justice. Once you make a move, there's no going back." I sat in my kitchen, the room dim and suffocating, reflecting on the legal frameworks I'd once helped design to protect communities from exactly this sort of abuse. Ironically, those same protections were now being trampled by the very people sworn to uphold them. The noose was tightening, each act more precise than the last, daring me to remain silent. After Diane's departure, I picked up one of her laminated violation notices from the stack I'd collected. I lit a match and held it to the corner. The official letterhead curled and turned black, the red warning letters disintegrating into ash. The glow of the fire flickered in the cabin window, a small but deliberate signal. This wasn't surrender, it was resistance, quiet but undeniable. A warning flare to anyone watching that their control wasn't as absolute as they believed. I knew what I had to do next. If people could lie, money could not. I called my banker, Sarah, and asked her to trace where my HOA dues really ended up. The answer came quickly. Every dollar funneled straight into Green Valley Maintenance Solutions, owned by Curtis Broken Bar Curtis, the same Curtis who sat as board vice president, collecting HOA dues with one hand while funneling them into his own business with the other. He played both roles at once: a fee collector and contractor without bidding, oversight, or accountability. It wasn't just unethical, it was theft dressed up in official stationery. The numbers were damning. He billed the association $1,800 a month for lawn work worth barely $600. Repairs came in at double the market rate, using the cheapest materials he could get away with. In a single year, more than $40,000 was siphoned from residents' pockets, padding the profits of Curtis's family company. When Diane announced a community barbecue as a gesture of goodwill, it couldn't have been more perfect. She thought she was reclaiming authority through charm and social pressure. What she really created was my chance to show everyone exactly how they were being robbed. I arrived with evidence carefully organized: bank statements, contracts, invoices, each package labeled for the households that had been overcharged under Curtis's monopoly. The smell of catered food, ironically supplied at inflated prices by Curtis's company, hung in the air as neighbors laughed at picnic tables, unaware that they were literally eating the proof of the scam. I went straight to Diane's table. She sat in the center, performing her usual role as queen of the neighborhood court. Without ceremony, I spread the documents across the table like cards in a poker match where everyone was about to see the dealer's trick. Conversations nearby faltered, heads turned. "I made an interesting discovery," I said loudly enough for half the barbecue to hear. "I traced my HOA payments to see where the money goes. Turns out it flows straight into Curtis's private business account, the same Curtis who approves those maintenance contracts as your vice president. Quite the coincidence, don't you think?" Diane froze, her fork suspended in midair, a clump of potato salad sliding off while she tried to process what had just been said in public. Across the table, Curtis stiffened, color draining from his face as the realization hit that his quiet arrangement was now exposed to the very people funding it. "You're spreading lies about legitimate business operations," Diane snapped, standing with rehearsed outrage. "Our contractors are selected through proper procedures. This community has operated under those systems for years without issue." I calmly slid a pair of receipts toward her, pointing at the signatures. Same handwriting on both of the fee collections and the inflated invoices. "Curtis approves the charges and cashes them himself. That's not management, Diane. That's embezzlement with a letterhead." A circle began to form around us as neighbors leaned in. Years of unease over unexplained fees and shoddy services suddenly had an answer. Mrs. Peterson peered at the invoices with her plate still in hand, nodding slowly as though puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. "Wait a minute," Tom said, pulling one sheet closer. "Curtis billed us $1,800 for mowing 12 yards that take maybe 4 hours. My guy handles twice as much for $500 and does a better job." Janet chimed in, showing photos on her phone of half-finished lawn work. "I wondered why my grass looked worse after he came through. Now I know." Curtis rose from his seat, posture stiff and aggressive, trying to salvage control. "Community expenses are clearly documented in annual reports. Anyone can request access through official channels. False accusations like this only hurt our stability." "Perfect," I replied evenly. "Then you won't mind giving me a copy of that report, so we can compare it against the bank statements." The silence that followed was electric. People who had accepted inflated fees as the cost of order now saw them for what they were: Curtis's personal slush fund. Diane tried to steer the gathering back to friendly chatter, but it was too late. The spark had caught. Neighbors began voicing their own concerns. Molly wanted to know why no competitive bids were ever presented. Others recalled projects that cost thousands yet left visible flaws. Phones came out. Photos were compared. Every word spoken was recorded. One resident even live-streamed the entire exchange to the neighborhood group chat. I spread the rest of my evidence across the picnic table: bank routes, harassment emails, survey maps, fraudulent signatures, everything I'd been forced to collect in silence. Residents studied them in growing disbelief. One by one, they began snapping pictures, capturing proof Diane and Curtis couldn't bury. Diane approached, her rigid stance betraying the cracks in her control. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Carter?" she demanded. "Sharing public records with the people who pay for them," I answered clearly, loud enough for the cameras. "Bank statements, county filings, board emails, nothing private, nothing fabricated." The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Tom read invoices aloud on camera. Janet compared costs to legitimate market rates. Mrs. Peterson displayed screenshots of harassment emails. Molly explained the lack of bidding procedures to the livestream audience. It wasn't just me accusing anymore, it was the community, piecing together years of suspicion into undeniable truth. As more residents gathered, the barbecue transformed from a casual social event into a public trial. Diane's phone buzzed non-stop, calls from fellow board members, desperate to contain the damage spreading faster than any official announcement ever could. Curtis tried one last defense. These accusations are unfounded, nothing but drama stirred up to disrupt our peace. But his words rang hollow. Every invoice, every signature, every inflated charge laid bare in front of the very people he had been exploiting. For the first time, Diane and Curtis weren't just facing me, they were facing a community armed with truth and the recordings that would outlast any lie. The weekend brought Diane's reinforcements, a lawyer named James Mitchell, who carried himself with the kind of authority that came at hundreds of dollars an hour. Without asking, he spread papers across my kitchen table, while Diane and Curtis stood at his side like loyal bodyguards, clearly invested in the performance of legal intimidation. Their settlement offer assumed I was desperate. $25,000 if I agreed to move out voluntarily. In return, I'd sign a gag order about their association's shady practices, and hand over easement rights that would legitimize their phony boundary claims. Mitchell presented the terms with polished arrogance, stressing how generous his clients were being given my difficult behavior. Diane chimed in with her syrupy voice, insisting everyone would be happier if I just took the deal and left. According to her, some people simply weren't suited for communities that required cooperation and respect for procedures. I excused myself calmly and walked to my filing cabinet. Their confidence grew as if they believed their financial offer had finally ended my resistance. But what I pulled out was a thick folder labeled Community Development, a collection of documents I had been saving for this exact confrontation. Inside lay the original community lease agreement, written 15 years earlier by me. I held it up and casually mentioned I'd been reviewing some old property records that morning. There was one clause in particular, a section 14, subsection B, that deserved special attention given their recent misconduct. Mitchell leaned forward with professional interest, while Diane's face drained of color as the implications sank in. The lease spelled out management obligations and prohibited activities with painstaking precision. Among them, no harassment, no fraudulent property claims, no misappropriation of funds, and no systemic intimidation of residents. Any violation triggered immediate termination of management rights and restored control to the original developer. And I wrote this clause, I told Diane directly, to protect this community from people exactly like you. The kitchen fell silent except for the shuffle of papers. Mitchell's legal instincts kicked in as he realized everything about this case had just shifted. Diane stared at the signature line as though it were written in a foreign language. I explained what she had never known. This was not an association-run subdivision at all. It was a long-term rental development where I held a master lease. The houses had been sold individually to families who wanted ownership without HOA interference. But ultimate authority remained with me. Her supposed power had never been real, it had been borrowed authority she fabricated through fraud. And now, with one signature, I showed them proof. My name appeared on the original contract. My developer credentials confirmed my ownership of every square foot of land they had been pretending to govern. I didn't inherit this lease when I bought the Henderson place, I said. I wrote it when I created this entire development. The realization shattered Diane. Her years of bullying and control collapsed in an instant. She accused me of lying, but her voice was breaking, desperation bleeding through. Mitchell's polished confidence strained as he recognized that his settlement visit had actually become evidence gathering for a criminal case against his own clients. Curtis looked completely lost, unable to process how his side hustle of siphoning community funds had suddenly turned into a felony. I pressed play on my phone, letting them hear Diane's own recorded confession from the weekend. Her voice was unmistakable as she admitted to abusing authority regardless of legality. I quoted Section 14B aloud. Violations result in automatic termination. Then, with deliberate finality, I announced, your lease to manage this community is revoked. There is no HOA here anymore. What remains is a criminal investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. Diane's carefully polished persona shattered in a fit of rage. Curtis attempted a half-hearted defense, asking why my name would be on the original paperwork if I had only just purchased a cabin. The poor man still couldn't grasp that some people plan decades ahead while he was busy plotting lawn care scams. Mitchell gathered his briefcase, already calculating how fast he could distance his firm from this disaster. Even he admitted there would be legal challenges, though he clearly had no faith in his client's chances. 3 days later, with their fraudulent regime dissolved, we gathered for the first true residents' meeting in Molly's backyard. 12 households sat as equals, discussing community management without intimidation or manufactured emergencies. Financial audits revealed Curtis's theft in full detail. Tripled damages under fraud law meant residents were owed $120,000 in refunds. I waived all landlord fees retroactively for the entire period of their abuse, ensuring restitution went back to the people they had wronged. Justice came quickly. Diane lost her board position permanently while prosecutors reviewed her role in falsifying property boundaries. Curtis's business license was suspended, his contracts cancelled, and his embezzlement charges carried real prison time. The surveying fraud was pushed into the county's criminal system, where everyone knew exactly who was behind it. Mitchell's firm formally cut ties after reviewing the evidence. With their collapse, our neighborhood reinvented itself. Governance shifted from authoritarian control to resident democracy under legal oversight. Molly volunteered to lead at first, but responsibilities rotated monthly so no single person could dominate. Competitive bidding was mandated for all contracts, ending the family monopolies that had bled residents dry. We celebrated with a symbolic ceremony. Diane's chains blocking pathways were cut and removed. Old violation notices were tossed into a fire pit as kindling. Curtis's overpriced equipment was auctioned off. The proceeds returned to households that had been overcharged under his so-called management. For the first time in years, our community felt like a neighborhood again, free of manufactured authority, intimidation, and fraud. Once the community freed itself from the HOA's grip, service providers who had once been too intimidated to return finally came back, confident that residents were now shielded from retaliation. My electrician finished the long-delayed cabin projects, and air conditioning replaced those sweltering nights spent with only a phone flashlight. Internet was restored, reconnecting us to the world beyond the isolation the HOA had manufactured. Weekend rentals picked up again, drawing 5-star reviews from guests who cherished the peace of a community no longer living in fear. For me, the most personal step toward healing was tearing down the very first violation notice Diane had taped to my cabin door. The ink was still smudged from that morning when she and 2 board members stormed across my property, waving papers meant to intimidate someone they assumed would cave immediately. That notice, along with their other baseless threats, ended up burning in my fireplace where they belonged. Neighbors soon began sharing their own hidden stories of intimidation, things they had endured silently for years. 2 families even confessed they had nearly sold their homes at cut-rate prices just to escape violations identical to mine. Others admitted they had long suspected Curtis of overcharging and Diane of running the whole like a personal dictatorship. Word of our victory spread quickly, and other communities reached out asking for guidance on how to set up president-led governance and shield themselves from HOAs that abused their authority. Our case established a legal precedent that allowed leases to be terminated when boards engaged in criminal mismanagement, a framework that other developers could adopt to protect their residents. Not long after, we hosted another community barbecue at the same picnic table where I had once laid out proof of the board's crimes. This time, the gathering was a celebration of genuine cooperation. Food came from vendors chosen through fair bidding, not Curtis's inflated family monopoly. Diane's old violation slips provided perfect kindling for the fire, while Curtis's abandoned equipment trusted in Strategia tagged by sheriffs as evidence for the ongoing case. Eventually, county officials approved our new governance structure, confirming that residents were fully protected against future board abuse through democratic oversight and competitive service contracts. Boundary markers were reset and flown with official county flags, signaling that no HOA could alter them without facing criminal charges. Watching neighbors relax around the grill, Free from years of financial exploitation and intimidation, I thought about the 15 years I had spent developing legal protections specifically designed to stop abuses like these. The plan had worked. Their crimes were exposed, residents were empowered, and justice had been delivered not through shouting matches, but through evidence and patience. Even now, I still receive calls from other neighborhoods facing the same kind of HOA corruption. Residents share stories of boards that overstep their authority, and developers consult me about governance models that protect people instead of enabling criminals. My attorney keeps our case files as a template for prosecuting property fraud. Life at the Henderson cabin is peaceful again. The air conditioner hums steadily, delivery trucks roll in without chains or barriers blocking the road, and weekend guests leave glowing reviews about the calm atmosphere and honest community management. Property values have even climbed since residents took control of their finances. Sometimes I drive past Diane's old house, now owned by a retired teacher who tends a thriving vegetable garden where violation notices once piled up. Curtis vanished after his business collapsed under criminal investigation, and the maintenance contracts he once controlled are now shared among legitimate companies, saving residents thousands every year. Mitchell never answered my holiday card. But the most rewarding part wasn't the win itself, it was watching my neighbors realize they'd always had the power to end the abuse, if only they had the right information about their rights and protections. Mrs. Peterson has become a loud voice for financial transparency. Tom now organizes the fair bidding process that keeps contractors accountable. Janet manages community communications with honesty, not manufactured emergencies. People often ask why I waited so long before revealing my identity. They think I should have ended the harassment right away, instead of enduring the isolation and economic warfare. But the truth is, patience showed me just how far the HOA would go when they thought no one could stop them. That evidence is what ensures they'll never have another chance to abuse residents. Our case has become a model for others. Prosecutors now use it to investigate HOA fraud, and developers consult me about frameworks that preserve resident rights while preventing abuse of power. I even framed the original violation notice Diane handed me, hanging it in my kitchen as a daily reminder that no one can invent fake emergencies to destroy the peace we've reclaimed. Now, monthly barbecues rotate from house to house, filled with real community spirit and no phony authority, no inflated bills, no endless notices, just neighbors working together. And strangely enough, I never had to raise my voice. I never fought them head-on, I just waited. They tried to own me, but in the end, I owned the ground beneath their feet. The lesson is simple: patience isn't weakness, it's strategy. And sometimes, it's the sharpest blade you can carry.